Do you want to accelerate your language learning? Become a Spanish, Japanese, German-speaking master? Then you're in the right place. Our special guest today is Nicolas Luna. Yep, that magic man, the language coach of Daniele Scuterti from episode 79. Check it out. Today, you will learn how to let go of all those fears and identities that have been holding you back, melt into the person that you deep down want to be, and enjoy soaring past your language plateaus all along the way. This is my conversation with language and communication coach, Nicolas Luna. So, you help people learn languages. What are some of the common obstacles in that journey for people?
Great question. Okay. There's the quotation at the beginning of Anna Karenina. It's kind of perfect for this because it says all happy families are alike in the same ways, and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own ways. And that's basically the case with the problems people have. Learning a language, although what I really specialize in is helping people to get unstuck. So most of my coachees/students are already quite advanced. They're usually at around a B2, almost C1 level. And that happens to be the point where people get stuck. Because according to the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, it just says that 20% of effort, time, money, whatever, gets you 80% of results. And in a nutshell, the B2, it's basically that 80%. So that's where most people get stuck there. And then moving on, it's going to require 80% of effort, which is why people can't move out of there and they spend years trying to do it. So some of the most common things has to do with confidence, for example. People feeling not having enough confidence. Sometimes another one of the things has to do with people not wanting to abandon identities. For example, it depends on whatever issue they might have, right? Because there's pronunciation, there's fluency, there's vocabulary, and there's grammar. And everybody can come at it with different issues. No, it's always a combination, but there's always something that's a little bit stronger. So sometimes when it has to do with pronunciation, it can, once we dig a little deep, we can figure out that it's because they secretly don't want to sound like an American or a British person or something. It's what I'm getting at is that the rabbit hole goes pretty deep. And my job is to dig and find out what's really stopping them from reaching these points. And sometimes, or rather often, people think they want to reach this higher level, or rather they have to get a job, but there's a part of them that doesn't want to, right? There can be, I've even had students who actually hate English, right? And we had to figure that out first before they could actually start to move forward. So anyway, that's just a tiny taste.
No, this is fascinating. I feel like you're already transforming me, and I'm not even your client. I live in Japan. I've been living in Japan for the past decade or so, and
Wow.
my Japanese is good. It's good, but when you're talking about the whole identity piece and do you really want it, that kind of thing, it got me thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to sound like a Japanese person. I don't like that vibe. I mean, yeah, some people do, but I'm not Japanese, and I like my Americanness. And I fear maybe that if I get really, really good at Japanese, I'll lose my personality. I will lose also something else. That's where the coaching journey goes. You go dig deeper and deeper into all of this, and we don't have time for that right now. But whoa, yeah, talk more about this identity piece.
Sure. That's a big one. So there's something called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which was put forward by one amateur anthropologist and one where he basically just kind of repurposed the theory of a actual linguistics professor, an anthropology professor. Anyway, so without really knowing much about it, this has become a really deep and entrenched part of our culture, especially in the States, but in Europe, it also, this whole idea that if you learn a new language, it changes the way you think. And that is BS. That's actually really ridiculously easy to disprove. And yet, as usually happens with media, people, some magazine finds that idea, and then other people copy it, and like broken telephone at the end, it's like, learn a new language, think a different way, be a completely different person. And that's part of the fear, right? Is that if I learn Japanese perfectly, am I going to start to think like a salariman? You know, I don't want to be like, I don't want to be a salariman. That sounds like a horrible life. They're drunk at 6 p.m., laying there in their own vomit. I mean, yeah, I know what you mean. I've been to Japan. However, luckily, that theory is absolute BS because what that theory says is that if you learn a new language, that basically it says that we think in words and we don't actually think in words. And the way to disprove it is ask yourself, have you ever been like, I've got the word on the tip of my tongue? Yeah, of course. That's because we don't think in any specific language. We think in, as Noam Chomsky says, mentalese. That's so Noam Chomsky is big linguist, and he says that we think in this universal language, and only when we're born or when we learn a new language really deeply, we lock into it. So there's like we've got a program which is already pre-installed, which according to the different languages, we can only click into. And I'm seeing it with my own son who's learning 4 languages at the same time. And once he gets it, he's like, oh, I got the grammar. His grammar is flawless. It's just the vocab he needs to build up. So anyway, that's a long story short to say that this theory has been pervasive for many years, and it helps to make people scared that they're actually changing. However, a language is actually more like a set of clothing, like a costume that we put on. And yes, it permits us to make certain movements, maybe that another language doesn't permit as easily, but you can talk about nuclear physics in Quechua, even if they've never had a word for nuclear. The point is, there's no need to be scared because it's just like costumes we put on. And we can really rock that costume and it doesn't change who we are.
Yeah, and part of this costume, there, yeah, like you said, there are movements involved. You're able to move your facial structure in a different way, maybe your arms,
Right.
vocalizations, emotions, all of these kinds of things. But yeah, it is a costume because I do think about when I speak like a Japanese person. It's a game. I'm just playing a little game, and then I go back to being me. And in the background, underneath it all, I am still me. But it's like it's an acting almost. In the beginning, it's almost like an acting improv game, which is like kind of feels awkward, but I guess you just jump into it or something. Yeah.
I mean, to be absolutely technical, even your American persona with American English is you're actually something different than that as well. I mean, that's also a persona, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up bicultural and now I've lived in a bunch of countries and there are pros and cons. Like I don't really feel Mexican or American or Thai or whatever. So there's a bit of feeling lost in there, but at the same time, it kind of has cleared it up for me that I'm not anything really. I'm if anything, I'm like global in some way, even though I've got, I don't know, kind of an American accent. And I mean, I speak in English.
There's other parts of the identity thing as well. It seems like sometimes people are holding on to the idea of I'm not good enough. I'm not. They don't want to be perfect. Like they keep saying, "Oh, well, I'm not so good. Can you speak Spanish? Can you speak English? Oh, I'm okay. I'm okay." And it feels weird to be like, yes, I'm fluent, yes, I'm great, or something. So there are probably a dozen billion other sort of identity obstacles, but that's another one.
Yeah, it's fear, right? Fear plays a huge role in our lives, right? I mean, biologically speaking, fear is there to keep us from dying before we can have offspring, right? And we also find out that nowadays many of our fears are irrational because we're not actually being chased by tigers anymore. But this identity thing is tied very much to ego. Like, what am I? And if I'm not this, then what am I? And if does that mean I'm nothing? Like, am I just the ether? So I definitely have seen a whole lot of this. And I can go in and tell you the reasons, the interesting things I've found. For example, why Spanish people have so much harder a time learning English than Latin Americans who are also Spanish speakers.
Wow.
Yeah, yes, Latin Americans have a kick ass pronunciation in English compared to people from Spain. Why is that? They speak the same language as their mother tongue, right? There's a whole lot of stuff there.
You're leaving with these cliffhangers. I have to I have to dig into all this, but that's fun. That's fun. And you speak how many languages? You're living in Thailand. Maybe you still are. I don't know. Mexico, U.S. You're speaking German a minute ago. Yeah, maybe talk about some of these different languages you speak. And you did mention, yeah, okay, it's not about the individual language. We have this sort of universal grammar or language that Chomsky is talking about, so we don't need to dig into too much about the
Mhm.
cultural differences or the linguistic differences. But yeah, do you feel different in some of these different costumes where it does sort of change you temporarily, or should we just not focus on that? We should just focus on like let go and enter the meltiness of reality kind of thing.
Well, I mean, my son has no problem letting go and entering this. For him, it's just a way to communicate, and it has all these different add-ons, but he does it. And in my experience, that is the best way to become fluent and to start to gather the kind of native rationalization of new words and things. But it's really scary, to tell you the truth. I mean, of course it is. And that's the thing that stops people and slows people down the most is that they're holding on so tight to what they know and to what they think is correct. It's like driving on the wrong side of the road, right? In Thailand, they drive on the opposite side of the road. And it's very complicated, but it's also very simple. And like I tell people, I said, oh, when they tell me, hey, how do you do that? How do you switch from place to place? And I say, it's simple. It's just everything is the opposite. But it does happen to me sometimes that I literally become frozen. And I mean, it's dangerous because when I'm switching between driving in Mexico or the States or Thailand, I used to, it doesn't happen to me anymore. I used to actually get frozen on the road and I had no clue what side I was supposed to be driving on. I was thinking, I'd like the cars where we stopped, I'd just be like deer in the headlights, frozen there. Because once you become used to it, which you can become used to it very, very quickly, in a couple minutes, as a matter of fact, your life depends on it, it just makes sense. And then you wonder, wait, it's like Dr. Seuss's, that story of the people that buttered their bread on the bottom and the right side up. It was a long time ago, but that's exactly what Dr. Seuss was talking about, is that things that feel so logical to an American or even a Westerner, except for England, of course, like driving is actually just as logical the other way. I mean, identically, it's just as easy to drive on the other side of the road, and everything makes just as much sense. And that's the same thing, one of the same things that you probably have to go through when you start learning Japanese, because Japanese, in terms of grammar, is mirror image to English, right? Pretty much. And so it's like, yeah, you learn it, but you have to just get it through your head, I guess, that like, okay, it's just the opposite.
Yeah, just drive on the opposite side of the road. Yeah.
Yeah, and speak with the opposite, like Yoda, right? It isn't Japanese. I think Japanese is just the opposite. It's like if I say I eat an apple in Japanese, it's like watashi wa something, right? Apple I eat or something like that.
Yeah, the verb will go at the end. The subject's still the beginning, the subject, object,
Oh,
verb.
it's just yeah,
Yeah, and that's fine. It's like you're just like literally driving on the opposite side of the road, and you just gotta get used to that. And you actually do in real life too. But I'm talking about like in a metaphorical way. And this is why how a lot of language works. I guess is you're just it's not a huge discomfort, but it's like oh, it feels weird to be on the left side or the right side or this or that. And but we hold on to these yeah these identity things, but also these cultural things, these just general habits, these rules and things
yeah,
because it does feel dangerous. But what you're saying is just go into it, just jump into it, and it might only be a few minutes or well maybe a few months, probably not, and then you'll be like, oh, it's fine, it's just
yeah,
jumping into the deep into the pool, and you're like you start swimming.
yeah. That's exactly what I tell people when they start to work with me. Is I say, imagine I'm your swim coach. I'm about to kick you into the pool. Well, push you into the pool. I said, don't worry, I'm not going to let you drown, but I want to see how well you swim. And that's exactly how I do. It's like, I want to get you surviving as quickly as possible. Call it doggy paddle, whatever it is. Let's just make it work. This is when I'm working with people from the very beginning, right? Because I hate to waste people's time, right? I value it very much. And I'm very grateful that people pay me good money, or at least, to me, it feels like this, to, to help them, right? And so the thing is, people already have a lot of knowledge. I mean, even if you feel like you've never heard the language before or never studied it, you've seen it in movies, whatever language they want to learn, they have a lot of knowledge, latent knowledge already. So I try to figure it out, dig it out, and then use it. And then try to do the 20%. Try to focus on the 20% of activities, vocabulary, whatever it is, that'll have the biggest effect. Basically, I'm just filling in the gaps.
And they let go, they jump into this meltiness, but they're not like stuck in this weird, chaotic, ruleless, boundless land.
No,
They find
no.
themselves. Because when I was talking to one of your students, Daniele Scuteri, he's saying how you helped him find, you know, speak English better, but it's also like he discovered himself more, and he's like reaching his potential, and he started getting into neuroscience more and more and talking about it. And this is where the real meaning is for him is connecting with people around the world and being able to talk and connect with people about what he really loves, which is sort of this neuroscience and physical mental health kind of stuff. English is
Yeah,
it's part of it, but it's something much bigger, and it's a confidence. Just like the confidence and the happiness I hear in his voice when he's speaking about this. It's not just an English journey; it's a big life journey or something. A discovery of your potential and someone believing in you and you believing in yourself and finding this is what I can do and this is what I love. And yeah, getting
yeah,
getting unstuck in language and art and communication and social life and your mental and physical health. It's a whole thing. But yeah, the interview I did with him, like that's when he really lit up, and that's why I reached out to you. I was like, oh my God, who is this mythical creature who's transforming lives?
it's yeah. English is nothing but a tool. And actually, he already spoke English before I met him.
Mm.
That's why that's why I'm really hesitant to say I'm an English teacher or a Spanish teacher because I'm not. I'm a language coach, but as time passes, I'm more of a developmental coach because yeah, none of my students. I've only had one student in the past, call it 10 years, that has actually wanted to become a language teacher. Only one. Everybody else wants it as a means to an end. So my job is not to force down their throats things that they don't need. My job is to give them the tools and help them cross that bridge, get to their goal. Because after all, I mean, nobody speaks perfect English or perfect Spanish anyway, not even native speakers. I teach I teach people how to communicate better. And it's a complicated thing. It's an art to it. There's a whole lot going on there. How to how to make people want to listen to you. Because that's how you communicate. And if you can make these connections with people, if he can, in the case of Daniele, use English as a means to connect with his true passions, which is exercise and sports and breathing, and how all of this can help you to become happier and more resilient, then I mean, that's basically, that was, shall we call it, my sly way of working with people, is that they come to me saying, "Hey, I want English or whatever," but that's just the first thing. And then I find out as quickly as possible, okay, what is it that's what you really want? And then I encourage that. And as we're going along, I'll fix a few things here, whatever, make sure that bridge is strong enough. But that's what I did with Daniele. I mean, I found out what he really was passionate about, and then we encouraged him. I said, okay, now share it with the world. And luckily, somebody else at his job also said the same thing to him. And he's also quite competitive. So I used that to my advantage as well. One time when he was slacking a bit, I said, "Hey, that's all right if this is too much for you." He's like, "No." I'm sly. I'm really sly. And that's exactly why I started to do everything. Because, like, I get people to their goals, whatever it is, but you got to find out what it is first. And then language is just a tool.
Yeah, and each person has their own learning style, their own way of sort of processing information, their own passions and things they like and hate and things that motivate them. I guess
Yeah.
it's sort of just your. I'm trying to figure out the process. I guess it's a long kind of like linguistic. You're asking them questions, you're talking to them, but yeah, can you kind of unwrap like what the process is like to for them to kind of or for you to discover how their system works?
In a nutshell, I'm pretty low tech in terms of this. A lot of it has to do with journaling, a lot. So I get them to journal, and then and then I innocently at the beginning ask them something like, "Hey, what's on your mind today?" And it kind of catches them off guard a bit, and they start to tell me, and things pop up, and I say, "And what else?" So in this case, I'm using the techniques of a really awesome coach called Michael Bungay Stanier. He was recently named the best coach in the world, and he's got a very, very different way of coaching people. But anyway, point is, he says the best question of all is, "And what else?" And that's because people's first answer is never the real thing. It's never the real. So if you ask somebody, "What's on your mind?" or "What's the challenge?" or whatever it is, what do we need to work on? They'll tell you one thing. And then you need to say, "And what else?" And you got to do it as long as many times as possible, even if it's slightly pushing the person's buttons, because 99% of the time they come to you saying, "Hey, this is the issue that I need to work on." And at the end, we find out that it's something completely different. And that's my responsibility as their language coach. And actually, for slowly, for more and more people, we reach a point where their language is already, they've reached their goal in terms of language. They can communicate and do whatever. And they stay with me now as a purely developmental coach as well. So it's like there's a whole process involved because then the challenges are always changing. But the challenge that they tell you at the beginning is rarely the real issue. And so, as a coach, my job is to shut up, stop, not give my opinion, and just be curious, really, really curious. And then once we find out what it is, then still try to help them figure it out for themselves. Because neurologically speaking, if we tell somebody something, it's not going to stick anywhere as well as if they come up with it. So it really does have to be their journey. And I don't know, I'm just their Obi-Wan Kenobi or their, yeah, I'm not even a Yoda. I'm not giving people answers. I try to really, really rarely do that.
Yeah, you're Chewbacca. I'm just kidding. um, and then once they sort of there's sort of different little paths or little areas where you're kind of like leading them. Hey, go there, go there. In Daniele's case, he started posting on LinkedIn a lot these messages in English, these posts about what he loves, yeah, the breathing and the exercise and the mental and physical challenges, etc. Messaging people, we talk back and forth. I'm sure he's doing that with other people in English, but it's not about English. It's about connecting with people who like the same things and talking about and sharing your journey in on the sports field and doing CrossFit, etc. Yeah, it's sort of engaging in social media, like places like LinkedIn. That's one way to sort of practice your language. And I know it's not all about the language, but still, what are some methods or ways you found for some of the people you've been working with that help them practice and use their language sort of stealthily? They're not. It's not like they're getting out a textbook and doing the exercises. They're doing something else, but it's like, whoa,
Yeah,
actually, I'm learning, I'm practicing, and changing.
yeah, yeah. So coming back to Daniele, for example, he used to rarely do his writing homework because, and he had excuses about it. And it's okay if Daniele hears this.
Yeah, and I asked him before this if it's okay to talk about him, and he says you could talk about me all you want, no problem. You have my permission, so he's down for he's okay with all this.
Yeah, he knows too. Also, um, but this is the same case with anybody. I could have just as easily said X person, but it's just that with this concrete example, he went from not liking to write, not wanting to do his writing homework, habits, whatever, to spending 3 hours a day writing these posts now. And with it, his English level skyrocketed. So, yeah, super stealthy, right? Because it wasn't about me. And I'm always trying new techniques. I mean, it wasn't about, hey, you should write more, but rather, what do you like? What do you love? What are you passionate about? Would you like to share this? Would this be a bad idea? Yeah. Okay. So start. I'll help you along. And before you know it, he's spending 3 hours a day writing in English and researching. And that's how his English gets better super fast. So that's one example.
So you're tapping into their other needs. It's not just
Oh, yeah.
like, oh, my desire to learn English. That's like a really surface level need. It's like I need to connect with people. I need to
It's very
learn about
surface.
this thing. And there are a billion others. So yeah, if any others come to mind, yeah, one is it seems like a lot of them might be sort of social in nature, but some of them might be things you do totally separate from people. But by tapping into that social need and the need to connect is, I think, a really powerful one and very stealthy.
That's a powerful one. But even the quiet ones, for example, I haven't, most of my coaches are programmers. And most are guys, as a matter of fact. And several of them have written stories. And one of them is actually writing a whole novel, like Lord of the Rings style in English. And he's just really into that. And it's awesome to read. And another one was writing heavy metal songs. Another programmer, by the way, who's also a weightlifter and a programmer. So there's just all these different facets to people, which you got to dig into. And for me, it's really satisfying when I'm able to get to the point where people, it's satisfying and I feel privileged when people open up and tell me, well, you know what? Like when a big CEO tells me, oh, actually, I really like this journaling thing because it's helping me to understand my relationship with my kids or whatever. And I'm like, whoa. And at the same time, he's doing it in English and he's writing a ton. And lo and behold, his English improves. It's it's sly from my behalf because my job originally for which I was hired, was get me to the point where I can just talk to people. But I'm just, I rarely go in a straight line. It's usually all the way around, like a completely different way. Because once people are at this 80 point mark, it's like really, really steep. So from barely starting to talk to this 80% mark, this B2 level where most people stay, it's kind of like an even walk up a mountain, right? It's you're walking. But suddenly at that point, you start to have to pull out the axes and start like climbing, rock climbing. And then when we get closer to C2, I mean, it's really, really, really hard. I think a lot of native speakers are probably not C2 either.
Yeah.
So what the real thing that needs to happen there is not any specific grammar or language trick. It's just good old hard work. And my trick is, how do I get them to do the really hard work without them knowing that it's really hard work? Well, pick something that they're crazy about. If they love it, you don't even feel it.
Yeah, and they expect this too. It's not like you're deceiving them. You're being stealthy, but they know this is what you are. You're this.
Of
You're not a
course.
Yoda. You're not an Obi-Wan
Of
Kenobi.
course.
You're Chewbacca. I'm just kidding. But they like that. They like that magic. Those magic tricks you're kind of playing on them because they work.
It is. Even when I teach things like phrasal verbs, I tell stories. I tell stories of Vikings because, well, stories came before writing. I mean, we've been telling stories for 150,000 years. It's it's almost in our DNA. And there's a lot of science backing this up right now. So again, I'm being stealthy because the final goal is how can they communicate effectively and do whatever it is that they really want to do if they don't have this sort of quite complex vocabulary that is rarely taught, even though it's very common. And so, yeah, I'll use anything that I need. And stories happen to be a really great way. And, stories light up your whole mind. They release oxytocin. It's yeah, it's so much better than a simple presentation.
Right, because even that guy who's writing the metal songs or other songs, the Lord of the Rings like novel, even Daniele's sort of stories on LinkedIn, they're little miniature stories that all connect together. And then with these other characters, it's his connections on LinkedIn, for example. But yeah, it's all kind of this. You're tapping into this story. It's a real life story, but it's also sort of this fictional story on the page or on the screen.
Yeah, yeah. It has to be fun, right? Because if not, keeping it up, this pace of this very complex and difficult pace with all the things happening in the rest of their lives, is they'll quit. They'll quit. And I mean, I've had to learn the hard way how to do all these things, through trial and error, of course. And some things I learn, and some things are a gut instinct, and then they're proven right by science. But there's there's definitely there's a part of me where I also let go when I'm working with people, and I just trust it. And again, it sounds really like, you know, magical and stuff, but uh, I was just watching Transformers the other day with my son, but I also like it. There's this quote that says that what some people call magic is what other people call just science or technology. And there's more and more science coming out right now that is backing these things up. That when you enter this flow state with people, you're able to access more knowledge than you consciously have access to. And also, it's really fun to be in flow state, which again tells us, hey, if it's really fun, then we're probably supposed to do it. Um, just like other basic things in life, right? Like eating or reproducing, right? This stuff is mind blowing to me.
I also teach English sometimes, but to usually a group setting. What how does this work for someone when they're sort of, I don't want to say they're stuck with a bunch of classmates, but they're in this big classroom setting, or the teacher is teaching a group. It could be a small group or a larger group. It seems like a lot of these techniques kind of break down at that point, but maybe there's other ways into. Uh, Basically, my question is, how can we become better teachers, and how can we be motivated to study more as students in a classroom setting, in a group setting? Or is the whole model just freaking broken, and we gotta change the way we do education? Maybe that's an answer too. Who knows?
Well, I mean, I think we do need to change the way how we do education for sure. And yes, the typical traditional Prussian model of education is definitely outdated and broken. But that said, we have to be resourceful. So, okay, let me give you an idea. So, it's much more difficult when you have a whole group, but more and more, I'm seeing that people don't learn so much from what we tell them, but rather from what they see us do. Or rather, if something is really fun. So when I worked with groups successfully, because sometimes I often failed a lot too, it was it's how do you spark the excitement in their eyes? Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's by proving something or telling a story or generating some sort of again, slyly, some kind of a reason for people to create a debate. Or, and I'm not saying the dry old debates, but you don't say it, you know? It's like people people shouldn't really know that they're learning when they're learning. It shouldn't feel like work. It shouldn't feel like learning. It should feel like discovery and fun. And as long as there's that present, there's going to be this energy, right? You have to build different parts of the group up together so that there's this great energy that keeps developing. And that's really difficult. It's much easier to do it one on one. Super difficult. Props to people who continue to teach groups.
But that makes sense why games work. Why games are quite effective, especially at certain ages, or songs and dance. And so when you're teaching little kindergartners, they're down to play. It's like, oh, and so you have all these options for group settings. But once people get
Yeah.
older, they don't want to play anymore. So they're like, I don't know. But then when they're like 5 years old or 4 years old or even eight, or I've noticed when they're hit about puberty, basically they start not playing along as much. But once they're playing along and they're ready to
Yeah.
engage this story, this make believe, and together we're doing this challenges and adventures and all this stuff in the classroom together. There's a lot of options, but then once they're like, okay, now we're in textbook mode, we're in test taking mode, we're like deliberately studying only. Then you're like, okay, how do we do this? And for me, I've seen that's when it kind of breaks down. I can teach little kids easy, but when they get older and super rigid and stuck in this traditional educational model, I'm like, ooh, how do we do this? It works, but I don't know. Is this really effective?
It's really, really tough. I mean, adolescence, it's called adolescence. That word actually means pain, right? It's a time of pain. But it's also a time of idealism. I mean, they'll trust you, but once we lose the trust, they will never trust again either. So it's a very, very delicate time. Like surgeon like care has to be done with. It's not as forgiving with as little kids or even as older kids. Call it 17, 18, or college, right? That's a whole nother story, right? It's a tough one. I spent a lot of years teaching different, different types of subjects in different schools for middle schoolers, and it was super tough.
Who are some of the people along your journey, maybe in this time of your life, or maybe later on as an adult, who helped transform you and bring you where you are now?
I can think of two very easily, and they both are from my high school age when I was a high school student.
Wow.
And yeah, yeah, yeah. My one was my biology teacher, and the other one was my theory of knowledge teacher. It's this. I studied IB, It's basically like philosophy. And what the biology teacher did was inspire me to the point where I actually applied to study biology at UC Berkeley. And
I studied philosophy at UC Berkeley. Did we do? We're like little spirit matches.
oh wow, yeah, I didn't go there though. I didn't go there. I mean, I got in, but I'm just what I my point here is that she inspired me so much that I got in, but then I realized, wait a minute, actually, I don't want to study biology. I want to study art. But like that's how good she was. Do you see what I'm saying? Like she was so friggin' good that I thought I wanted it, and it's like I just like went like master. And now from that point on, she became director of the high school, and after that, now she's director of the whole school. Like she just and later on, I went back and worked at the same school, and she's a total badass. Like a total badass. I don't know if she's read up on all this science and stuff, but she was the kind of person. She's like, a middle-aged woman. And even the coolest, baddest, high school kids, she'd be like, hey, the other teachers, they'd be like cussing at the teachers. These are rich kids, right? This is a fancy school. And the kids would like super rude. And the teacher would be like, hey, you got to come. And she'd just come in and smile and be like, that's enough. And I mean, she doesn't have like crazy power or anything. Just your good old principle. But like, and the kid would be like, oh yeah, you're right. Just like that. She didn't have to say, I'm going to call your parents or anything. I knew. And when I tried to teach history and I sucked at it, she fired me from teaching that. And she said, okay, you got to go teach something else, within the same school. But she had this thing about her where even though she's like, no, I'm going to take over. You can stay outside. You can go and leave now. When I was like, okay, thank you. Like there are a few people who can fire you and you're like, okay, thank you. Like up to now, she's the baddest badass I've ever met in terms of this. The other guy was my philosophy teacher who I was a little shit to him. And when I came back after college, said I just visit him. I'll visit the school. He invited me into his office, and right away he offered me a job as his assistant. I was like, "What's going on here?" And so for him, I'd say faith and like a deep, deep faith in the goodness and in the potential of people. So from her, from Donna, we'll say this amazing people skills. And from him, I'd say faith and just like the love and trust in humanity and like that people can change. That's what I take away from him. And from then on, yeah, no, I mean I'm 40 years old now. That was when I was, 17 and then 25. And from that, I haven't met anybody that's that amazing since then.
Yeah.
Yeah. The rest has been books.
Yeah, but they're actually like, looking at you and listening to you and being kind and treating you like a human and trying to make you a better human and like not giving up on you and challenging you yet loving you. And
Exactly.
for me too, I have a few teachers in my background too that without them, my whole life would be completely different. But and it's also like almost like a deeper connection than I might have with. I mean, I love my parents, but like some people are maybe more parent like and loving and like, wow, this is what a this is a real relationship, and they're teachers. And like, whoa, that's amazing. When you find those people, parents are great, but they're also limited in some ways. So when you find these teachers to push you along in other directions that your parents just can't, or for whatever reason,
Yeah.
that is life changing. And when you don't have these people, and they're rare, you have two or three in your life, maybe.
They're really rare. Yeah. Yeah. I'm really grateful for that.
How can we find more of them? How can we freaking increase the odds?
I'm trying to figure that out too.
Or just get lucky? I don't know. You just stumble upon each other, but they're life changing.
One thing occurs to me, and it's to trust. I mean, this is where I get really hippy dippy. But
Go for it.
the thing is, all this hippy dippy stuff, I mean, I also read a ton of science books and linguistics. And I mean, it's like I got the data to back it up. But what comes first is the intuition. And so many of the biggest choices in my life, I've just gone with gut instinct. And now we know that the intestines actually do have a lot of neurons and that they're capable of synthesizing greater amounts of data than our brain up here can. And therefore, it is the logically intelligent thing to do to trust our gut instinct. I mean, I'm talking even Wall Street brokers who are able to feel their heartbeat and trust this make more money. So I'm talking concrete stuff. And what I'm saying, just to answer this is go with your instinct. Like, should I go in here? Should I check this place out? I've never been in here before. These meetings happen. I mean, I met these amazing Mexican friends. They're like an uncle to me. And I met them at an insect museum in Chiang Mai. We were the only three people there. Like, maybe there's some kind of fate going on. As you can see, I'm a pretty big mixture of like, intuition, but also science.
Yeah, maybe like just as you jump into the language learning stuff, where you're like, okay, I'm just gonna let go and boom, and see what happens, and the pieces re-emerge and connect together in beautiful ways. Maybe when you're just out around, like at an insect museum or on vacation or walking around your hometown, you kind of let go of your rigid habits, like you stop angling your eyes in at your phone or going this direct path, and kind of shutting off your environment, and instead being like, I don't know, actually like listening to the
Exactly.
people and the things around you. And then like I've noticed,
Yeah.
I tend to, yeah, we all tend to be like in our little, rigid little patterns out in the streets and stuff. But then when you do like kind of just like, you're just there and like kind of ready to connect, ready to open and see things and listen to things. You start
Exactly.
meeting people, things start happening. The beauty rises. Everything is like, whoa, I'm alive again. But yeah, chance encounters really increased for me in those cases.
Exactly. Exactly. It's wild. It's just wild how that happens. And conversely, when we get locked into our everyday regular lives, everything shuts down as well. It's, on just a weird, interesting note here, actually related to this, I also teach I also teach drawing to biology students from American universities. Every year, I'm hired by the EAP program of these universities to fly down to a tropical island and teach 20 biology and environmental science majors how to draw scientifically. Like that's a nice job. Um, and it's pretty cool. And one thing that I learned is that the 7 precepts for mindfulness, there are 7 precepts for mindfulness. I mean, things such as acceptance, things like this. I can send it to you later if you want. These same are exactly the same. They call them precepts, but it's basically just attitudinal foundations, right? What attitude should I have in order to practice mindfulness correctly or, most effectively? These 7 are exactly the same ones for learning how to draw from observation and for learning a new language.
Wow. And also these people you talked about, your teachers, these two teachers and my teachers, they also were tapped into that zone.
Yeah,
They had this mindfulness. So maybe that's all it is being in that state of awareness, and that kind of attitude opens you up into growth and connection in all kinds of weird magical ways you couldn't even imagine.
yeah.
But how do you get there? Because like, yeah, you read these things, but then how do you get there?
How do you put it into practice, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And how do you communicate it? If somebody were to come out and tell me this stuff at some point, I mean, my immediate reaction has always been locked down, right? To these new ideas. I'm not, I mean, I might sound like I got my stuff together here, but there's a bunch of stuff I teach that I totally fail at in the rest of my life. And you know what? I tell this to my coachees and students as well. I'm pretty transparent with them. It's the least I can do, you know. But how? Well, I have to go. I have to say it's never directly, never really directly either. It's again stories or just doing it. You know, like to teach drawing. When I teach it, I'm able to teach somebody to draw, guaranteed, in under an hour. I've sped it up. It used to take me 2 weeks, then it went down, blah, 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 blah. Now I can do it in an hour. And I use 90% less words than I used to use, which is also kind of wild, right? It's like there's in all of my life, I wanted to go through flow, right? Because flow is an altered state of consciousness where we feel great. And for me, it happens when I'm working with somebody, or right now I'm in flow,
I am too.
or when I'm drawing. Yeah, we're having a really great conversation. And this doesn't happen every day.
And we're behind the screens and cameras, and we can still. I'm amazed by this technology that somehow it allows this.
Yeah, this doesn't matter. It does. Yeah, exactly. You're in Japan and I'm in Mexico in my uncle's, office.
And we just met for the first time, which is usually you sort of push yourself away from strangers, especially deep conversations. And it's like two dudes like who don't even know each other, like, and we're like, boom, let's go. And it's like this weird trust thing, and it's amazing.
It's one of the 7 precepts. Trust.
Oh, man.
It is this kind of letting go.
It's also just the fate right now that
you got to go.
It's time to go. I don't want to go, but this is what it is. You also just have to let go of the conversation, and let go of the beauty, and let go of the connection sometimes, and just jump into something else because it's what you have to do. You have responsibilities, etc. And maybe that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah. I got to go take care of my kid.
I hope we can talk about drawing and creativity and all of that. I don't want to like milk you for everything you're worth, but dude, that's a whole other thing we could do.
Yeah, I'd love to.
That would be amazing.
Great. I'm happy to. I'm super lazy to do like social media stuff. So I'm really grateful that you interviewed me because I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And I'll admit there was a point in my life where I was stingy with my knowledge, but now I realize that that's just such a stupid attitude. So stupid because it just gets rotten, and then somebody else comes up. I mean, it doesn't matter anyway. I mean, the whole point is how can we make life better for other people, right? How can we share? Because we're all going to die anyway, Yeah.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, once you realize that, and you experience death of loved ones or parts of yourself, you're like, okay, let's just go. Let's just live. If people want to connect with you or get your coaching or whatever, where do they go?
There's italki, there's LinkedIn, there's my website. Yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nicolas.
Thank you too, Michael Waite.
Nick Luna. I'm happy to meet you, and even the fact that we met was sort of a magical little serendipity. I mean, I found Daniele's posts on LinkedIn actually, which sort of was sparked by you, and then it led back to you. And like, had he not been doing those posts, had you not sort of encouraged it, I would have never interviewed or met him.
I know, he's such a great guy.
And that gave him an extra chance to speak English. Now he did a podcast in English, like for
he's so proud or whatever, of himself
about his topics that he loves.
Yeah,
it's like, whoa, my God! It's like I love how it all connects.
Yeah, me too.
I hope it keeps going. I want to see where this goes next, and where this leads. But yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you too.
Adios.
Adios.